I've covered a lot of forgotten DC characters, and the pattern is usually the same. Some of them had solid runs, some had great ideas that just didn't land at the time, and others were basically erased by shifting continuity before they ever got a real chance. DC's history is packed with characters like that. Heroes and villains who were part of big pushes, big teams, or big relaunches, and then quietly slipped out of the spotlight. So in this one we're going back into the long boxes, looking at a few more DC heroes who deserved better than the limbo they ended up in. Let's get into it. Most of the time when we talk about forgotten Justice League members, we're talking about characters who sort of just drifted away. They had their run, maybe a few lackluster stories, and eventually the invites to the big team-up just stopped coming. But Bloodwind is a little different. He didn't just fade out, he barely got to exist in the first place. Created by Dan Jurgens, he made his first costume appearance in Justice League of America number 61, back in 1992. Right in the middle of a massive rate of new readers. If you were one of those kids, he stood out immediately because the design was doing all the heavy lifting. He was this tall, composed figure in a stark white bodysuit with a black cape lined in red and gold accents. It was simple, but it really popped. In a lineup full of loud personalities and over-designed costumes, he felt controlled and intentional. It's also worth noting at the time, his arrival was actually a pretty big deal for representation. He was only the third black member in the team's history, following the footsteps of Jon Stewart and Vixen. For a lot of readers, seeing a black hero with such striking, mystical presence on the world's premier super team felt like a major step forward. At first, it really felt like he was building towards something huge. He was the league's mysterious new recruit, and nobody had a clue where he really came from. He claimed his powers were magic, which is basically a blank check in comics to do whatever the plot needs at the moment. He could fly, use telepathy, blast energy, or even turn intangible. While the rest of the team was bickering or cracking jokes, Bloodwind was just there, calm, quiet, and observant. Characters within the story started to notice too. Blue Beetle spent a ton of time digging into his past, trying to figure out who or what he actually was. But the narrative didn't treat him like a traitor, he was just there, as if the mystery itself was the whole point. Then you hit the twist. A few issues in, it's revealed that the character we've been following isn't really Bloodwind at all. It was actually Martian Manhunter the whole time, being telepathically manipulated and physically reshaped by an entity trapped inside a mystical artifact called the Blood Gem. The real Bloodwind, the actual human being, had been trapped inside the gem since his very first appearance. Think about how much that guts a character. Everything you really thought you knew about him wasn't really him. The powers, the personality, and the chemistry with the League were just the Martian, filtered through a psychic fog. Even the version of Bloodwind who stood his ground against Doomsday wasn't actually real. And the Blood Gem itself is where things should have gotten more interesting. But instead, it just made everything messier. Because this wasn't just some random magic rock. The gem was created generations ago by enslaved people who used ritual blood magic to channel their suffering, their rage, and their need for vengeance into a single object powerful enough to kill their enslavers. That energy didn't just disappear afterward. It stayed in the gem, passing down through generations, tied to a specific bloodline. So Bloodwind wasn't just a superhero identity. It was supposed to be a legacy rooted in something real, something heavy, and something that actually meant something. Once the twist is out of the bag and the real Bloodwind is finally freed, the character immediately falls apart, because there's just nothing underneath the mask. He had no civilian identity, no distinct personality, and no clearly defined power set, since most of his previous abilities were just the Martian Manhunters. Even when DC tried to clarify things, it only made things more complicated. The real Bloodwind, typically identified as Quintus Archie, is a necromancer who draws power from the Blood Gem, meaning his spirits draw on their energy and channel that into strength, flight, or those red, almost blood-like energy blasts. The gem can even let him phase, teleport, or heal, but it comes at a cost, because it's tied directly to his life force. The more he uses it, the more it drains him. And then, because this character can never just be straightforward, you get another layer. At one point, the mantle is picked up by Raphael Arxie, who isn't even fully connected to the lineage in the same way. He finds the gem, uses it and gets access to surface level version of the powers, but without deeper necromantic control. So now you've got a character who already struggled with identity, being split across multiple people with different versions of the same power set that don't line up. Even his actual time with the Justice League never fully clicked. On paper, he fills a really important role. The League's supernatural specialist. The guy who deals with demons, curses, and things that Superman can't just punch. He even goes up against magic-heavy threats, like Felix Faust, and gets pulled into darker, more occult storylines. But none of it sticks. He's there, he contributes, then the story moves on without ever locking him in as the guy for that role. The real tragedy is that he never really got a second introduction. Usually when a fake character is revealed, that's cue for the real hero to step up and define themselves. But that moment never happened for him. He lingered in the Justice League background for a while, getting tangled in a vague subplot with the villain named Dreamslayer, who kept insisting Bloodwind had a grand destiny that never got explained. He'd take these weird stands, like refusing to fight back while being attacked, but without any established motivation. It just felt random. He had one solo story in Showcase 94 number 5, but it was a generic street-level plot that didn't give him a unique voice. Shortly after that, he just stopped showing up. He stayed in limbo for decades, but he actually had a surprise comeback recently. After a long absence, he reappeared in Action Comics Presents Doomsday Special Number 1 in 2023, and then again in DC Power 2024 Anthology. These stories tried to clean things up by recentering the Blood Gem and leaning into the family legacy, with Raphael stepping into the role in a more defined way, and Quintus being re-established as the true inheritor. It's the first time in years DC has actually tried to do something with the character that resembles a direction instead of just a reminder. If DC wanted to keep that momentum going today, the best move would lean into that erased status as a core trait. He's a legacy that was literally stolen by a demon, making him a ghost in his own history. You could reinvent him as a supernatural investigator obsessed with legacy, specifically because his own was taken from him before it ever had a chance to exist. And if you refine the Blood Gem, strip it down to what actually works, make it a tool of ancestral justice instead of just a vague source of misery, you suddenly have something strong. And then maybe at that point, Bloodwind could become something more than just a cameo in the background. While Bloodwind was a mystery that kind of erased itself, Ray Terrell, the second hero to take up the mantle of the Ray, is a different kind of problem. He's not forgettable, he's just never been used for his full potential. For over 30 years, he's felt like a character sitting right on the edge of breaking through, and DC just never commits. He debuted in the Ray number 1 in 1992, created by Jack C. Harris and Joe Quesada, right in the middle of the early 90s Extreme era. And what's kind of interesting is that he doesn't follow the trend. He's not super bulky, he's not overloaded with gear. He's just got a clean golden black design with a leather jacket and a helmet that feels more like streetwear than superhero tech. It's simple, but it works, and it helped him stand out immediately. The real hook, though, is the origin. Ray grows up completely isolated because his father tells him sunlight will kill him. So his entire life is spent indoors, cut off from everything, raised in controlled environments, basically taught that the outside world is lethal. And then when he finally steps into the light, he doesn't die. Instead, his powers activate. Because the truth is, the sunlight allergy was never real. It was a lie. Ray had inherited his abilities from his biological father, the original Golden Age Ray, and his childhood was essentially a long-term containment plan. His father wasn't protecting him, he was just delaying something he didn't understand. So, when he finally gets out, he's not just learning how to be a hero, he's learning how to exist after realizing his entire life was built on false information. That's the angle Christopher Priest leans into during the mid-90s series. Ray isn't confident or fully put together. He's dealing with identity, trust issues, and the fact he's sitting on a level of power he doesn't really want. And that power is where things get a little ridiculous. On paper, he's a light-based hero. In practice, he's a conduit for the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He can absorb light, store it, and convert it into energy blasts, flight, or even hard light constructs. He can bend light to become invisible, and he can even turn himself into pure light, which makes him intangible. But it also scales way beyond that. He can move at light speed. He can generate extreme heat or cold by shifting his energy output. and at higher levels, he's been shown manipulating matter on a subatomic level. At that point, he's less of a traditional superhero and more of a walking energy system that happens to look human. He continues to show up in bigger stories like Infinite Crisis and Blackest Night, working with teams like the Freedom Fighters, dealing with multiversal threats, and doing exactly what you'd expect from someone with his abilities. He's effective, he's versatile, and he's clearly operating at a higher level than most of the characters around him. He's just never the focus. Even his team history reflects that. He's been tied to the Justice League Task Force, Young Justice. He's always around, but never quite central. He doesn't get the kind of sustained push that would actually lock him into the upper tier. DC kinda tried to fix that during Rebirth, with Justice League of America, The Ray Rebirth #1. Written by Steve Orlando, they streamlined his origin, bringing the focus back to his isolation, and placed him on a new Justice League of America. And for a while it worked. In the 2017 Justice League of America run, he actually feels like he has a more defined role. His power matters, and he's given space to grow. This is also where DC confirmed that Ray is gay, which honestly fits the character better than it feels like a change. A guy who spent his entire life hidden away, told he couldn't exist out in the open, finally stepping out into a light. It lines up cleanly with his origin and adds another layer without replacing anything. But once that series ended, the momentum dropped off again. Since then, Ray's been mostly reduced to background appearances, quick shots in events, maybe a panel, no dialogue, and then he's gone again. And that's where the issue really shows up, because a character operating at this level shouldn't be treated like a background extra. If you actually take his powers seriously, the direction for him is pretty obvious, and it's something I think Marvel already figured out with Bucky Barnes, when they positioned him as the man on the wall. Not a public-facing hero, but the one dealing with the threats before anyone even knew they existed. To me, Ray could fit that role almost too well. Instead of treating him like a standard superhero, you could position him as something closer to a system, a living extension of the electromagnetic spectrum, someone who could detect signals, distortions, and incoming threats across wavelengths no one else can perceive. Put him in space, not as a headline hero, but as a constant presence. Intercepting alien transmissions, stopping cosmic anomalies, handling problems that never make it anywhere near Earth because he deals with them first. At that point, everything about him starts to make sense. His isolation becomes part of the job. His power level finally has a purpose, and that original idea, a character raised in total darkness, could come full circle in a way that could actually pay off. Triumph, William McIntyre, is arguably the most intentional bridge burner in DC history. Created by Mark Waid, Brian Augustin, and Howard Porter, he officially crashed into the DC universe in Justice League of America 92, back in 1994. But he wasn't just a new recruit. Through a massive retcon, he was revealed to be a founding member of the original Justice League. On his first mission, he saved the world by overloading an alien time-manipulating device with his own electromagnetic energy. But in doing so, he got sucked into a temporal limbo that erased him from history, wiped everyone's memory, because of course it did. He returned decades later to a world that didn't know his name, and he was, to put it mildly, a total jerk about it. And that bitterness didn't come out of nowhere. Before all this, William McIntyre was a reclusive, borderline obsessive kid who idolized Golden Age heroes like Hourman. His powers manifested during puberty, giving him control over the electromagnetic spectrum, basically one of the fundamental forces of the universe. He trained himself in isolation, built his identity from scratch, and when the Justice League first formed, he didn't just join it, he led it. So when that entire legacy gets erased, it doesn't just take away from his achievements, it takes away from the one thing that he built his life around. Writer Christopher Priest, who eventually took the reins on the character, admitted that Triumph's know-it-all attitude was a tribute to late DC creative director Neil Posner. The tragedy of Triumph is that he was almost always right, but he's so arrogant and self-righteous that nobody could stand him. He spent his entire career feeling like he had been denied his destiny, which made him bitter, desperate, and eventually a straight-up villain. He went from leading the Justice League Task Force to being completely unstable, mind controlling his own teammates just to force loyalty, before spiraling even further down to the point where he is destitute, literally selling stolen League gear just to survive. And then, the universe basically poured gasoline on that fire. During Underworld Unleashed, he makes a deal with the demon Nero, offering up his soul in exchange for power, and more importantly, the chance to reclaim what he lost. That deal amplifies everything: his abilities, his ego, and his resentment. From there, it only gets worse. He ends up possessed by a fifth-dimensional entity named Lix, which pushes him completely over the edge, turning him into a full-scale threat on both the Justice League and the Justice Society. By the time the Spectre finally stops him, freezing him in time, whatever version of Triumph that could have been a hero is basically gone. When you look at his power set, Triumph is actually terrifying. As a master of the electromagnetic spectrum, he doesn't just shoot light. He can perceive and manipulate energy on a level most heroes can't even comprehend. He can hear radio and television signals, sense movement through electromagnetic fluctuations, and generate force fields strong enough to tank hits from top-tier characters. He can enhance his own strength, durability, and speed to near Kryptonian levels, manipulate gravity, disrupt technology with EMP bursts, and even exert limited control over the human brain by influencing bioelectric signals. Superman once remarked that Triumph could actually kill him, just by cutting off his access to solar radiation. And based on what we've seen, that might not be an exaggeration. Yet despite being powerful enough to threaten a Kryptonian, he was constantly undone by his own personality. His original run ended in the late 90s when he was turned into an ice statue by the Spectre, and eventually killed when Prometheus destroyed the Watchtower. The last time he had any real spotlight was during the Trinity series in 2009, where he was resurrected in an alternate reality, and weirdly enough, that's where you get the version of Triumph he probably should have been all along. In that timeline, without the weight of his erased legacy hanging over him, he actually steps up, he fights alongside other forgotten characters, builds real connections, and ultimately sacrifices himself to save Tomorrow. It's the one time his story comes full circle. He goes out like the hero he always believed he was, even if nobody remembers it. Since then, he's been almost entirely absent from the modern DC landscape, existing mostly as a footnote or a cautionary tale about what happens when a hero's ego outweighs their mission. If DC wanted to bring him back today, they should lean into his role as a high-stakes antagonist who actually has a point. Imagine him returning not as a common criminal, but maybe as some kind of super lobbyist, or a political fixer for the metahuman community. He's the guy who could use his tactical brilliance, his understanding of the system, and his mastery of information to manipulate public perception against the League, arguing that their noble methods are inefficient and outdated. By positioning him as a rival leader of a government-sanctioned team, you could create a massive ideological conflict. He wouldn't be trying to destroy the world, he'd be trying to fix it, by force, proving once and for all that he was the right choice for leader 30 years ago. Maya, real name Chandi Gupta, represents one of those quieter tragedies in DC's roster. A character built on her strong concept, a distinct cultural identity, and real emotional weight, who still somehow ended up fading into the background of a wider universe. She was created by writer Gerard Jones and artist Ron Randall, debuting in Justice League Europe number 47 in February 1993 as part of the Red Winter storyline. From the start, her origin carries real intensity. Chandi is an Indian teenager whose emerging elemental abilities lead a cult to believe that she is the reincarnation of Shiva. That belief turns dangerous fast, and when she discovers they intend to sacrifice her, she escapes and flees to London. There, she takes on the name Maya and almost immediately crosses paths with the Justice League Europe, helping them defeat Sonar and earning a place on the team. From there, she becomes a regular member of the roster through Justice League Europe number 49, and continues all the way to the book's conclusion, number 68 in 1994. She also appears in related titles like Justice League International and Justice League Task Force, firmly placing her within the League's early 90s international expansion era. What makes Maya stand out isn't just the idea of her elemental powers, it's how unstable and personal they are. She channels fire and water through a mystical connection that is tied to her emotional state and cultural heritage, often manifesting as a psionic bow that fires energy projectiles, or later, more direct elemental manipulation. It's a power set that feels less like a tool and more like something she's constantly trying to hold together. That instability becomes central when the Justice League Europe faces the Overmaster, a cosmic entity manipulating events on Earth. Maya's past comes back into focus here in a very literal way. The cult that shaped her origin is revealed to have been influenced as part of the Overmaster's wider plan. During the conflict, she is briefly mind controlled and turned against her allies, only being freed through the sacrifice of Miyogi, a mentor figure who helps anchor her back to herself. After the disbandment of the Justice League Europe, Maya steps away from active hero life and effectively disappears from the core DC narrative. What follows is a long pattern of sporadic background level appearances, rather than ongoing development. She briefly assists Wonder Woman in Wonder Woman Volume 2, number 174 in 2002, appears among assembled heroes in JLA 100, and is seen in the background during Infinite Crisis number 6. In each case, she's present in the universe, but she's not really part of its ongoing story. Outside of the comics, she does service occasionally in adaptations and games, appearing as a background civilian cameo in My Adventures with Superman, added as NPC in DC's Universe Online, in a mystical support role. But these are brief acknowledgements rather than meaningful continuations. Taken as a whole, Maya becomes a character with a strong foundation that simply never received a modern follow-through. She was part of DC's push to build a more international Justice League in the early 90s. She had a visually distinct, culturally rooted power set, and she was positioned at the emotional center of Justice League Europe during one of its most interesting eras, in my opinion. But once that era ended, she never quite found a place in what comes next. If DC ever decided to bring her back properly, the most natural direction wouldn't be to reinvent her. It would be acknowledged to what she already was. A veteran hero who was pulled into something bigger than herself. Too young, shaped by manipulation, faith, and survival. That version of Maya doesn't need to be reintroduced as a rookie. She needs to be reintroduced to someone who has already lived through what most heroes are still learning about. The Heckler is one of those rare DC characters that makes me question how he isn't a household name, and also question what exactly DC was thinking when they let him happen. Created by Keith Giffen alongside Tom and Mary Beerbaum, he debuted in 1992 in his own self-titled series. Born out of Giffen's idea of a superhero Bugs Bunny, a chaotic, smart-mouthed trickster who wins fights by being the most unbearable person in the room. Since DC wasn't going to hand him the actual Looney Tunes, he just built his own version from scratch and dropped it into Delta City. Stu Mosley is his civilian identity, co-owner of a rundown diner called Eats in the poorer district of Delta City. By day, he's dealing with staff drama, broke business problems, and the general grind of trying to keep the place afloat. By night, he puts on a bright yellow costume covered in ha-ha lettering and becomes the Heckler. There's no tragic origin, no cosmic accident, no mystical explanation for how he got here. He just decided that crime in his city needed to be aggressively mocked. And that's really his entire philosophy. The Heckler doesn't have super strength, flight, or any traditional powers. Instead, he weaponizes pure verbal warfare. His entire fighting style revolves around relentless sarcasm, psychological irritation, and turning his opponent's own egos against them until they effectively defeat themselves. He's often compared to Marvel's Madcap, since both used absurdity as a weapon, but the difference is intent. Madcap is chaos and nihilism, where the Heckler is controlled, deliberate annoyance with cartoon logic applied at full force. He's not a brawler, he's a disruption event with legs. His rogue gallery matches that energy perfectly. Boss Glitter is a theatrical mob boss with a flair for the dramatic. El Gusano is a literal humanoid worm assassin. Seste is a psychopathic scarecrow obsessed with performance and delusion. He even ends up dealing with the 4 mopeds of the apocalypse, which tells you everything you need to know about the tone of his world. Even his supporting cast leans into parody. Figures like the Meeks, a mohawked gunman parodying Punisher-style vigilante, and Rabbi, Zone and Dreidel, a duo that function as a surreal, exaggerated take on Batman and Robin. Across the original 6-issue run, takes down threats through trickery, baiting enemies into self-destruction, and surviving encounters that should realistically end him. Whether it's El Gusano, the Cosmic Clown, or Glitter's criminal operation, the pattern is always the same. The Heckler talks, the villain spirals, and somehow the situation collapses under its own absurdity. It's part street-level crime fighting, part cartoon physics. Despite strong dialogue and some real artwork, the series was cancelled after 6 issues due to poor sales in a market that wasn't really interested in this kind of experimental humor at the time. A planned 7th issue featured a villain called Cutting Edge never materialized. After that, the Heckler mostly disappeared into the background. Cameos and niche appearances, brief bar scenes like in Book of Fate number 12, or team-ups like JLA Welcome to the Working Week in 2003, alongside Plastic Man and Ambush Book, leading into that shared DNA of Giffen-style chaos. It does eventually resurface in a more modern context with One Star Squadron, where he appears as part of a team of forgotten heroes doing low-level gigs through a corporate hero service system, with a slightly updated costume that exposes part of his face to better sell the sarcasm. He also shows up in background nods in 2024 appearances, like Blue Beetle and the Question tributes, following Giffen's passing, reinforcing him as one of those characters DC never fully lets go of, even if they don't quite know what to do with it. And that's really the modern problem with the Heckler. He works best as a pressure valve in superhero universe that often takes itself too seriously. If DC ever decides to properly use him again, it almost writes itself. Drop him into high-stakes, grim, overly serious superhero storytelling, and let him be the one guy constantly pointing out how ridiculous everything actually is. Not as a powerhouse, not as a chosen one, but as a guy who refuses to let the genre forget that it can be weird. If you enjoyed this look at a few more of DC's forgotten characters, why not give the video a like or subscribe for more Longbox content? I appreciate all of you for sticking around. These are the kind of heroes and odd corners of continuity that usually don't get much attention anymore, but they're still part of the larger history. If you want to support the channel more directly, and help me keep digging into these deep cuts, whether it's obscure Justice League members, forgotten solo runs, or characters that basically vanished after one era, you can check the channel membership through the link in the description. It generally helps with the time and research that goes into tracking all this stuff down. And members also get their names featured in future videos as a thank you. Before you go, I want to hear your picks. DC has no shortage of characters who got lost along the way. So who do you think is the most overlooked? Is there someone you're still waiting to see get a proper comeback? Or a character you think deserves a modern retool? Drop it in the comments. I read through all of it. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.